Off-screen candle, how's that? Hey my souls, welcome to this video about Evolution of Goddess by Emma Mildon. I have finished this book. Finally, it took me a long time, I will have you know. None of the book's fault, it's my own fault. It's the first book I read of hers and it's not a linear experience. It's more of a roundhouse kick, spiritual roundhouse kick, so many things in there, and you don't read it cover to cover, but rather you take whatever resonates, you go to the parts of it that resonate with you, because there are so many different goddesses, so many different archetypes that she talks about. So it's really not about reading this in a linear fashion, but rather experiencing it and taking in all of the information and all of the practices that she put in there. There is a little fuzz flying in front of the camera. Okay then. Okay. Yeah, the book calls you to a lot of different places, a lot of different modes of thinking and practices and traditions. So I'm going to talk about her writing style, my expectations of the book and whether they were fulfilled or disappointed, and the content quality in general, as well as the structure of the book, so that you can find out whether it's a book that would be interesting for you and for where you are on your path right now, or if it is too beginner, too advanced, too whatever. We'll go through all of that. So let's talk about the structure. She starts with kind of a long-winded explanation of how the book came into being and how she became the goddess that she needed to be in order to write this book. Of course, goddess not in the sense of she deserves worship, but rather she embodies the archetypes and the goddesses that she believes were helpful in her creative path. Now, this is the first pointer towards how this book is going to go, because it is not about goddess worship or examining the traditions of goddesses, examining how people worshiped them, what meaning they had to the people, but rather it is about embodying certain archetypes, especially goddess archetypes, but really any sort of archetype, and how to connect with them in a very practical way. It's not about here's how you establish your goddess practice, where you pray to them every day, you worship them every day, you dedicate yourself to them. There is nothing about initiation, dedication, anything like that, which is fine. I just want to make sure that you know what you're getting into. So let's talk about the structure, as I said, first of all, because I'm going to touch on all of these aspects later as well. She starts in kind of an academic fashion, which, you know, I can always appreciate that. I really loved Thorne Mooney's book, Traditional Wicca, because you could see her academic background. And Emma Mildon starts with a word definition and multiple word definitions, as well as kind of the mythopoetic framework within which she operates, which means she calls the chapter a goddess with 1,000 faces, I think, which of course is a reference to Hero with 1,000 faces. So you can kind of see where she is coming from. She is definitely coming from a little bit of a psychological and mythological standpoint, not so much worship or dedication or initiation. Sprinkled in throughout the book are so-called goddess gems that are about socioeconomic change or about people who have reached a lot, like Michelle Obama, and it just gives you an idea of what embodying a certain energy or a certain general perfect goddess vibe is like. You know, she kind of relates it to everyday things. In the part about sun goddesses, for example, she talks about solar panels and how someone is revolutionizing them in China. And it's a very interesting way to tie in these divine energies and elemental energies, most of all, with the socioeconomic and historical climate that is surrounding us. And I think that really sums up what she is doing, because a lot of the time it's more about elements than goddesses. Goddess is used in a way that isn't really about worship, as I've said multiple times. It is about the elements. It is about embodying all elements equally, What elements there are, I will get to in a second. I keep going off on tangents and kind of jumping ahead. So besides talking about world history in the beginning and the Aquarian age, she also gives you a quiz to tune into which goddess archetype and which elemental archetype you relate to the most, and which one you might want to start reading with, which I really appreciated, because that kind of puts the book into perspective. You're not meant to read it beginning to end, but rather pick and choose what energy is vibing or not vibing with you right now, and in what area you want to build up elemental strength. And I also think that the whole talk about the Aquarian age kind of lends credibility to her approach, because a lot of the time it seems like she wants to bring about change. She is committed to writing this book in order to better people's lives and inspire people in a very intense way and in a spiritual way. So I feel like talking about the Aquarian age, whether you believe in it or not, creates a need for the book that she has written, because we are all changing and we are all finding our purposes and our paths in this crazy time, and seeing how we can be of service to others as well as to ourselves in the best way. I might actually do the quiz on camera sometime, but not right now. That would be way too long, but I think it would be fun to do. So let's talk about the body, about the main aspects of the book. It is separated into the elemental chapters. It starts with moon goddesses, then it goes on to water goddess energy, earth goddess, air goddess, and sun goddess. So these are the 5 elements that she works with. Well, you can barely call them elements because there's 3 of the traditional elements, water, earth, and air, and then you have sun and moon. I will talk about that later as well when I talk about the content quality and how the framework within which she operates makes sense or doesn't make sense. For now, let us talk about what the different aspects of the book always have. So the moon goddess chapter will have certain aspects, the earth goddess chapter will have certain aspects, and they have some in common. Each chapter has an intro into the power and the mythology of said element and goddess energy, if you want to call it that, which means that there's kind of anecdotes, there's a little bit of a personal touch. It personalizes the element and the goddesses related to it. And she has a very beautiful, dense writing style, which I will also talk about more later. But it basically brings across very well what the different elements embody. So it doesn't feel like empty new age blah blah a lot of the time, which, you know, it's always a danger with these kinds of books. But no, I actually do like her writing style and the way she brings it across. The second aspect is mythology. Here she lists goddesses. I will talk more about that later. I'm keeping myself from jumping ahead all the time. So yeah, you have the intro with the power and the mythology, which has anecdotes, personalization of that energy, and goddesses. The second part of every chapter, or unit in the book, if you want to call it that, is the evolution essentials. Here she talks about the elemental associations and a lot of correspondences, flowers, aromatherapy, foods, the zodiac, chakras, everything that relates to that. So for example, in the moon goddess chapter, you'd have moon flowers, moon zodiac, moon aromatherapy, and it's not just lists either, it's actual writing, and I really appreciate that. Also, they have masculine balance, all of them, as one of the aspects, which of course, you know, I'm not much of a masculine feminine kind of girl, I'm more yin and yang. And she talks about how to have too much masculine energy or too little masculine energy and kind of balancing it out in your full goddess power. And then we have the life phases for each element. I loved those. Basically, she goes through Maiden, Mother, and Crone and writes a little blurb about how these elemental goddesses or elemental energies behave with relation to that life phase. For example, how would an air maiden versus an air crone act and what evolutionary step are you in. And her writing style is very accessible and very practical, so I felt like it's easy to read it and kind of relate to it and see, where do I fall in? Where am I in relation to my air evolution versus my sun evolution, for example. And lastly, each unit has elemental modalities. This is where they each have individual aspects. These are not standardized. For example, it's very practical. With water, for example, you have a meditation, you have tips on how to connect with water specifically. For the moon, she talks about dream journals and about menstruation, of course, about the moon phases, solar eclipses, and how to connect with them. This is also very often yoga and meditation related, these practices. Then in the Earth unit, she talks about gems, which I really like, in the modality chapter of that unit. And she talks about altar building and goddess types of Earth goddesses, for example, cat goddesses, bee goddesses, spider goddesses. Basically, kind of giving mythical meaning to groups of goddesses, which I really enjoyed. But it was a little short, but I'll get to that later. I keep having to stop myself. Yeah, and then with air, you have breathing exercises, and also it kind of relates to Kundalini. And you also have aromatherapy as well as dream journaling again and chanting. And for the sun, you have a meditation, some candle magic. But I have definitely noticed that the water and the sun modality chapters are very short. So you can tell which elements she relates to and which maybe not so much. But I did appreciate that because I would rather she writes 2 short exercises than pumping out some really irrelevant practices that she has never tried herself just for the sake of filling up the book. So I can appreciate that she kind of knows her limits and just put a little bit into those categories. And in the end, of course, you have some inspiring tips and also an afterword that talks about how to communicate with goddesses at the very, very end. It's very motivating, very uplifting, and good to read. It's not just empty talk like that, and I can appreciate that. Before I move on to what I liked and didn't like, I want to talk about the common themes that I see in this goddess discourse and self-empowerment discourse. Maybe I'll make an extra video about it, but I feel like in order to understand what this book does, we have to look at 3 themes. The first theme is lineage. Because she always relates everything back to women that came before you, women that coexist with you right now, and kind of drawing strength from the knowledge that we are a community and that there were strong women coming before us and goddesses who came before us. So the second theme is self-actualization. This is where you actually step into being a goddess according to her definition, because a goddess, essentially, it seems, in her definition, is somebody who has life figured out, who has a good balance between all of the elements and all of the aspects of life, who has gathered wisdom, passes it on to others. So that is the second aspect, lineage, self-actualization. And then the third aspect is the role of caretaker, where you give to the world, you are of service to the world. And these 3 aspects, I feel, in a lot of the self-empowerment and goddess discourse that is going on nowadays in the community, those 3 aspects kind of roll it all up into one, I think. Of course, there's more aspects to it, but those are the 3 that I usually identify whenever I read a book or read a post about this sort of stuff. Just a quick reminder, I will put a link to my other book reviews down below, also a link to my Patreon, and I will announce the giveaway winner at the end of this video, finally. But anyways, let us now get into what I enjoyed about the book and what I didn't enjoy. I want to start off with the things that I did not enjoy so much or where my expectations weren't met. So maybe this is not a fault of the book because I bought it without a lot of research. essentially, I was looking for something that would give me goddess stories to relate to, that would kind of shed light on a lot of different mythological traditions and spiritual traditions with relation to goddess worship or goddess work, while probably also tying this to today. There's actually a very good book that I'm reading right now called Persephone Rising that does a very good job of this, of relating goddess stories and rich myths back to the world today and how we can use it in order to grow. I was kind of expecting that from this book, and I have to say that it didn't deliver, because usually she cherry picks some very interesting stories. For example, how Epona flees from the start of the day. She flees from dawn on her horse perpetually and rides in the night. You know, those are interesting stories, but they are super short. Only a few sentences for every goddess in the book. There is no storytelling where you could say, okay, I'm gonna sit down and read this to a child or read it to myself from a perspective of telling a story, you know what I mean? So essentially there isn't a lot of detail about the history of worship or the storytelling of the myths. She does sometimes go into a little bit of history, but usually not too much. In the beginning especially, and also in the Earth unit, she does have this aspect of tying together mythologies, you know what I mean? And kind of taking a meta view on the whole subject. But unfortunately not always. Then another thing that kind of bothered me was that sometimes there are duplicate goddesses where, you know, sometimes a goddess will be mentioned in the moon goddess roster, and then she will be mentioned again in the air goddess roster, for example. And I get that you can't put goddesses into neat little shelves like that and just be like, oh, she's a river goddess, so I'll put her in the water aspect, in the water chapter. Because, for example, I think her name is Boan. I didn't know her. I'm probably mispronouncing it. She is a river goddess, but she became a river goddess by seeking forbidden knowledge, which kind of puts her, I feel, into the goddess of air category, because seeking knowledge and seeking information, anything related to the mind, is more of an air quality. So here we have a goddess that relates to the element of water, but what she does is more airy in nature. So I get that you can't really categorize them. So I think for the fact that it is called Goddess Evolution, it doesn't focus on actual goddess stories a whole lot. I also regret that there is no glossary, which means that you can't just be like, okay, I want to look up Persephone, go to the back, see where she mentions Persephone and go there. You can't do that. You have to kind of find all of the goddess lists for each element and then search for the goddess that you're looking for, which is unfortunate in my opinion. But at the same time, it's not a book that I would always go to look up goddesses, because it is kind of short in its descriptions anyways. Now, another thing that bothered me was the elemental framework. I mentioned this in the beginning, but obviously she took away fire and replaced it with sun. So you have moon, sun, air, earth, and water, which means you have the three traditional elements plus moon and sun. In the beginning, I was very disappointed because I love fire energy, as some of you may know, and it's not in there basically. The sun energy is kind of different. It doesn't have the destructive aspects that fire energy does, and the fact that she took it out, it felt kind of like she just wanted to do something different and kind of forced it. And because she made moon the fifth element, she kind of had to make sun, like bring sun into it as well or something. I don't know, the framework doesn't quite hold up for me, especially because the moon seems to be the perfect element basically. It kind of brings everything together. It's cyclical, it's balanced, and that is exactly what the moon is, which is why I don't think it should be put on the same level as fire, water, air, and earth, because it's just different, you know? It's like a different framework. But of course, it is cool to activate that energy within you as well. It's just kind of a strange connection. I'm being a bit specific here, but I do want to specifically talk about this framework and whether it worked or not in my personal opinion. Another thing is that in every chapter, there's parts about how you can use that elemental energy specifically, which means that, for example, she would say if you want to connect with water, you can cry in the shower or something like that, which I actually really like. She has this everyday magic kind of vibe that I really enjoy. So you can consciously connect to the elements. But the thing is, then it will say stuff like, water is embodied by flow and being receptive to change. It can also freeze and be stagnant. And then when you look at the moon chapter, it will say something like it's cyclical and it's open to change and it hangs indifferently in the sky. It can be stagnant as well. So we have this repetition of symbolism throughout the elements, which kind of makes them less specific and kind of makes every element feel the same because they all have the same energies, which of course is a fact of nature because they are all related, but it just, it made it feel sometimes a little bit random or arbitrary. But I am also being a little strict here, so I do think she does a good job of relating it back to everyday life and kind of showing the symbolism that water and moon energy and air energy, etc. have. In the air chapter, she talks about the chakras as with every elemental energy, but she did not mention the throat chakra for air. The throat chakra and the air element are kind of like, they belong together, you know what I mean? Air is communication, and I don't want to be like she did it wrong, you know, but it surprised me. Let's just put it like that. It surprised me, and that's not bad. Maybe she's onto something. Maybe it is good to look at elements from different perspectives, but I do think it is important to mention that it's not a very traditional view at the elements. I also mentioned this with the order, you know, the normal order of elements is that you have water as the breeding ground, fire as the inspiration, the spark of creation, air as the blueprint for manifestation, and then earth as the manifestation. And her order in the book is different, which isn't bad. I mean, it goes moon, water, earth, air, sun. So kind of the other way around, which is fine. I guess why I'm mentioning it is because I want to say that this is not going to be a super traditional look at the elements, which isn't necessarily what you're looking for if you buy this sort of book, you know? It's not going to be a traditional breakdown of the occult elements, of the magical elements. It's a lot more creative than that and a little more unconventional. All right, let me talk about the positive aspects. I feel like I've talked a lot about the negative right now. She does have goddesses from all sorts of cultures, which I really appreciate. And some people might cry cultural appropriation, but I personally, that's what I came to the book for. I wanted to see an overview of goddess energies and goddess mythologies, so I really appreciated that. Her writing style is very passionate, very versatile, and very entertaining. It's fast-paced, but it's not hurried. It's not overwhelming. So the content, I would say, is very rich. It does have a high quality. At least for me, I like going back to the book and kind of looking up how I can forge a better connection to a certain element. So if I know that I want to strengthen my air element, if I feel like I'm not outspoken enough, or I'm just not breathing right or something like that, I could go back and read that unit in the book and be very satisfied with the input and the inspiration that it gives me. So I would say it is a good book, especially if you're a beginner. I think don't make the mistake of thinking that this is like general truth or general knowledge in the community, but it is a very specific woman's experience and thoughts about the elements, which is great and inspiring and awesome. I said that I appreciate the everyday magic that she brings into it, and I really do. So many people make the mistake of believing that magic is something that you do once every month as a ritual, but then forget to kind of practice daily alignment and daily tuning into the energies around them and relating to the world, connecting with the world, and living a conscious, magical life rather than just having these little compartmentalized areas of magic. And she does a very good job of inspiring people to do just that, in my opinion. So let us sum this up. I'm just going to give you a quick breakdown of what I think of the book, whether I like it or not, and you can think what you want, buy what you want, and yeah, see if you're interested in it. So first of all, I was sad that it's not a book with a lot of storytelling that has stories about goddesses that you can read yourself, to children, to whoever. But it is a very motivational, spiritual roundhouse kick that covers so many references, modalities, correspondences. This is really the strength of the book. It is very broad and very good at kicking everybody in the face with some really sweet information, basically. It is not a book about how to call in goddesses or how to worship divinity or to learn about how gods and goddesses used to be worshipped in the past. It is much more about embodying them and working with the archetypal energies at our disposal. At the very end of the book, she does touch on goddess communication and how to do it respectfully, but personally, it felt more like an afterthought to kind of tie the book together. But that's definitely not the focus of the book. It is more about, not the worship of direct address, but rather worshiping a certain energy by embodying it and by calling it into your life in a very active way, not in a hypocritical way where you just talk about it, but in a very active and practical way. And that's really the strength of this book. So it is a practical guide that is rooted in archetypes and in a variety of practices: yoga, meditation, aromatherapy. And what I love is that it's not just lists. Lists are, for me, the death of every book. When I see a list, I'm just like, great. I can look this up in 2 years. Maybe I'll need this list, but it's much better if you actually write about the things. Don't just be like, these are some moonflowers. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. No, she kind of writes a little bit about the meaning of the flowers, the meaning of the food. It's not just lists, and I really, really appreciate that. I want to stress that heavily and encourage anyone who is writing a book to not put lists, because lists only make sense if you have understood the energy and the intention behind all of this. Telling a story, showing people why certain things are on the list, that is the important thing. Unless you are straight up putting down a spell book where you have to, just list ingredients or something. That's fine, obviously. But if you want to explain correspondences to someone, writing in full sentences, relating it back to anecdotes or relating it back to occult knowledge or general wisdom teachings is a lot better than just putting a list, because it kind of just shows that you're trying to show how good you are and how much you've thought about it, but it doesn't get to the core of the meaning. The same applies to tarot books and tarot cards as well, in my opinion. Of course, you can put lists of attributes that the court cards have, but it's much better to kind of wrap it up in a story and tell it to the reader, show it to the reader, rather than just slamming a list at them. So much for that rant about lists. Anyways, the content is very rich, however, it is not story focused. I do like that she gives you a lot to resonate with. Her language is very good. She has a wide vocabulary, and I can really appreciate that, because I feel like with these new age books, a lot of the time, you're just going to have the same 20 words thrown at you that don't explain a concept really. They are just buzzwords. And with her, she has very beautiful metaphors, very beautiful symbols that she illustrates with her words. And I will highly recommend that aspect of the book, and also commend her writing style in general. She has a way of putting into words the elemental energies that might be considered a gift, really. It's not just empty blah blah blah. Now the content may be arbitrary at times, but it is creative. For example, she links air energy to dreams because you can induce sleep with breathing techniques. And of course, breath is air. So kind of drawing that parallel from, or that connection between air and sleep and dreams was very, very interesting for me as well. Not to mention that dreams are an expression of the subconscious, and air is about expression and about symbols. So to sum it all up, it is a book for anyone who wants to walk a path of self-actualization that is supported by a variety of different traditions and a very broad look at archetypes, at mythology, at yoga, aromatherapy. Someone who wants to live a conscious, magical life with meaning in a very practical way. It is not for you if you are looking for traditional definitions of goddesses, traditional elemental correspondences. It is much more creative than that, and I think it has its place in the community for sure because it is kind of unconventional. Okay, so the winner of the giveaway is Marta Carvalho. I probably butchered that name. I will write her an Instagram message and ask her what prize she would like. And I once again want to say thank you for 1,000 subscribers. That's what the giveaway was for those of you who remember. Thank you to everybody who participated, who might have shared it. And I'm really, really happy to be back in front of the camera. I had a little bit of a video break, but I'm back now. And I will also link my Patreon below if you want to see more of me, if you want more journaling prompts, thoughts about tarot, general readings, then it is definitely for you. Thank you to everybody who is already supporting me and giving me some legitimacy and making it possible for me to slowly shift into creating more videos like this, because this is my goal, creating better quality content, more content if I can. And I'm very happy that I took the first step on that journey, and I want to thank anyone who is already part of it with me. I'll link some interesting things below. My book reviews of Witch by Lisa Lister, or Traditional Wicca by Thorn Mooney, Wicca by Harmony Nice. All of that will be in the description down below. I hope you keep watching and dwell in my domain a little longer. Subscribe if you like, and I will see you next time. I wish you the best of weeks, the best of days, as always, and lots of fire. Lots of fire this Aries season.